The chain stitch is the basis of all crochet stitches. For example, a single crochet is a chain stitch with a head attached. The double crochet stitch has 2 chain stitches with the yarn wrapped around them and an additional head. You can create other stitches, such as half double crochet or treble crochet, by varying the number of chain stitches and the number of yarn wraps. As you can see, all crochet stitches are chain stitch variations. You can turn the chain stitch into any stitch you want by adding more yarn later. By utilizing this property, it is possible to make seamless crocheted fabric. Typically, when crocheting in the round, you crochet a chain stitch at the beginning and a slip stitch at the end of the round. Connecting the beginning and end of a round in this way will result in a line at the boundary. However, if you change the chain stitch into another stitch instead of using a slip stitch, you can join the ends of the round without creating any creases. Regular stitches and stitches modified from chain stitches by adding yarn have the same structure, so they are almost indistinguishable in appearance. This technique is not limited to a specific stitch and will work with any stitch. The rough procedure is to crochet in the usual way with the main yarn, then vary the chain stitch with the secondary yarn at the end of the round. After crocheting the next round, repeat the process by varying the chain stitch with the secondary yarn. A smart way to do this is to use the end of the yarn you started crocheting with as the secondary yarn. Leave a long enough end of yarn at the beginning of the crochet to use it to vary the chain stitches. The length you need will be about 3 times the length of the fabric you want to work with, plus some length to hold it in your hand. You may be wondering, won't the yarn ends need to be too long when crocheting large objects? In that case, you can divide the thread into easy to handle lengths. If the end of the thread runs out, you can use a new thread for the next round without any problems. If you want to change the color, leave the end of the thread longer when attaching the new thread. Now, I will explain the specific steps for each stitch. In the case of single crochet, crochet 1 chain stitch at the beginning of the round. Generally, we don't count this chain stitch as 1 stitch, but if you later transform it into a single crochet stitch, it will count as 1. Once you have completed 1 round, pull out the secondary yarn as you complete the last stitch. Next, pass this yarn through the stitch next to the chain. Finally, pull the thread back to the stitch from which it came, and it's complete. Once you get used to it, you can do steps 2 and 3 together. Also, in the first round, the final stitch is already completed when you tighten the loop, so you need to unravel it a bit to return it to an unfinished state before pulling out the thread. Once you have completed the chain stitch conversion, leave the secondary yarn and switch to the main yarn to crochet the next round. When you reach the end of the round, use the secondary yarn again to vary the chain stitch, then repeat. Next, I will explain the double crochet stitch. You only need to make the head with a single crochet, while with a double crochet, you need to wrap the yarn around the chain. At the beginning of the round, crochet 2 chain stitches. Generally, you would crochet 3 chain stitches, but if you are converting these later, you would reduce 1 stitch to make 2. Before crocheting the last stitch of the round, bring the secondary yarn to the front of the fabric. Then, when you complete the last stitch, insert the hook into the upper chain stitch and pull out the secondary yarn. Now, you have wrapped the yarn around the chain. The rest of the steps to make the head are the same as for a single crochet. For half double crochet stitch, the method is a little unconventional. At the beginning of the round, crochet 1 chain stitch. As you complete the last stitch of the round, insert the hook into the stitch next to the chain and pull the secondary yarn through. Insert the hook into the same stitch again to make the head. When you finally pull the yarn through, note that you pull it through 3 loops. In the case of half double crochet, the key is to pass the yarn through the same stitch twice. Next, I will explain the treble crochet stitch and taller stitches. In the case of a treble crochet, make 3 chain stitches at the beginning of the round. Generally, you would crochet 4 chain stitches, but if you are transforming these later, you need to reduce the number of stitches by 1. Before crocheting the last stitch of the round, bring the secondary yarn to the front of the fabric. Then, pass the yarn through the second chain stitch from the bottom. The preparations are now complete. The rest of the steps are the same as for double crochet stitch. For taller stitches, such as double treble crochet or triple treble crochet, you add more chain stitches. Please note that there will be more chains to thread the yarn through as you prep. The above explanation is the procedure for converting basic stitches. From here on, I will explain the case of decreased stitches. For SC2 tog, crochet 2 chain stitches at the beginning of the round. It is the same as making a single crochet stitch without the beginning chain stitch. Pull the secondary yarn out as you complete the last stitch of the round. Then, thread the yarn through the stitch next to the SC2 tog to make the head. We often use the SC2 tog when making amigurumi. When the opening in the fabric is narrow, you may have difficulty threading the yarn to the back. In that case, use a yarn needle to thread the yarn. For DC2 tog, crochet 1 chain stitch at the beginning of the round and then make a double crochet stitch. Before crocheting the last stitch of the round, bring the secondary yarn to the front of the fabric. Then, when you complete the last stitch, insert the hook into the head of the double crochet stitch and pull out the secondary yarn. Thread the yarn through the stitch next to the double crochet to make the head. For HGC2 tog, crochet a half double crochet stitch without a beginning chain. As you complete the last stitch of the round, insert the hook into the stitch next to the half double crochet stitch and pull the secondary yarn through. Insert the hook into the same stitch again to make the head. For stitches taller than double crochets, such as the treble crochet stitch, double treble crochet, or triple treble crochet, you need to work more chains at the beginning. Please note that you need to pass the yarn through chain stitches as preparation. Three tog and bobble stitch are variations of two tog. The number and position of stitches may change, but the basic structure remains the same. Next, I will explain about the Y stitch. For a Y stitch, focus on the right side of the stitch. Then, you can see the basic stitch. Imagine that you are converting a chain stitch to make this stitch. However, where left and right stitches are side by side, you need to thread the yarn through both stitches. When threading the yarn through the stitch on the left side, pass it through 2 loops when viewed from the back. I will introduce two patterns for inverted Y-stitch. The two are very similar, but there is a difference in how the thread is wrapping around them. If you want to convert these two from chain stitches, the stitches you make at the beginning of the round are the same for both. The only difference is that when you pass the yarn through at the end of the round, you either pass it through the chain stitch above the double crochet or you don't. Finally, I will show you how to join the chain stitches seamlessly without using a slip stitch when making a loop. Without making a slip knot, crochet the chain by placing the crochet hook on the yarn from the front. Leave the end of the yarn long, and it will be the secondary yarn. Work 2 fewer chain stitches from the required number. Pull the end of the yarn out of the loop on the hook. Insert the hook into the stitch you brought the end of the yarn through and into the first chain stitch, then pull the yarn through to form a chain. You have connected the chain stitches in a round. Here are some tips for crocheting the next round. Begin the next round by holding the main yarn over the secondary yarn. In other words, when the last stitch in a round is a chain stitch, start crocheting by holding the main yarn over the secondary yarn. The tip also applies to the second round and beyond. When crocheting a motif, the last stitch often becomes a chain stitch, so be careful. If the last stitch is not a chain stitch, hold the main yarn so that it passes through the other side of the secondary yarn. These were the instructions on how to make a seamless crocheted fabric. Because it creates the same structure as regular stitches, it allows for the most neat stitch connection. It is also a versatile technique you can apply to any stitch, so please try it out. Thank you for watching.